Welcome to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and today I'm bringing you my June wrap-up. That's what I'm bringing you. I was going to script this out and do notes and make it super informative with all the pub dates and all of it, but actually it's the end of June today. It's the 30th and I don't want to do that. I want to just kind of film and have a chat and sit with a cup of tea and have a nice time. And that's kind of where I'm at, partly because pulling all of these books off my shelves, I just need to dust my shelves. But they've kicked off my allergies again and I get so worn out. So in the interest of getting this video up, it's going to be a chatty, fun, nice, casual time going through everything that I read in the month of June. As you will know if you've been following this channel, and if you're new here, welcome, but if you'll know if you've been following this channel, I did a book a day in June reading challenge for the whole month of June, and I tried to read 30 books in 30 days, and I actually smashed that. I think I read 33 books in 30 days. So I'm dead chuffed and I'm ahead of my Goodreads goal and it's all good, but that does mean that this wrap up is going to be long. So settle down, grab a cup of whatever beverage you enjoy, whatever time of the day it is, I don't know, and we're gonna sit and we're gonna chat about books. And I'm gonna put a cardigan on because I'm kind of cold. And also grab my list, and then we're gonna go. I'm gonna go chronologically through the month, so if you've watched along with my vlogs, you may be familiar with the kind of ebb and flow of this. I think it helps to go chronologically, partly because you can kind of compare, especially when you come off like a really, really good book and the next one is really terrible. Sometimes that's intriguing. I don't know. Maybe it will be for you, maybe it won't be. I'm just holding this up. You already know what this is. This is The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. This was the first book I read in the month of June. I really love this. It smashed it for me. I adored this. I have a dedicated review. I will put the thingy in the place and you can find out all that I thought about it, but I really, really enjoyed this. This isn't out till September, but I think you're gonna really love it. Pre-order it. I'm gonna try and put these back as I go so my shelves stop looking as sad. Okay, I'm already breaking my chronology rule, but where it's a series that I read all in one go, it makes the most sense to talk about them all together. The next book I read was First Test by Tamora Pierce, but I'm going to talk about the full Protector of the Small Quartet, which is what this is. I adored this. This was really good. I've read the Alana books and the Dane books. So Alana is she's a girl who pretends to be a boy to go through night school, and the Dane books are the kind of wild magic animals ones. And this kind of took everything I liked about both of those series and jammed them into one, and I absolutely adored it. It's fantastic. They start out, First Test is very middle grade in its kind of feeling. Lady Night, the fourth one, is much more grown up. It's much full YA, and I think these books were designed to be grown up with, and I really love that about them. Reading them all in one go, great decision, and by that I mean across a month. Really, really nice, lovely writing, great characterisation. There's a dog. What more do you want, really? I just think these are fabulous, fantastic, wonderful, and I need more Tamora Pierce in my life immediately. Next, I read The House of Binding Thorns by Aliette de Bodard. This is the second book in, and I've already forgotten the name of the trilogy again. I'm a terrible person. I genuinely can't remember, but it's the Magical War in Paris trilogy, and I loved this. Definitely worth rereading the first one, which I did in May, as kind of a whim at the end of May, but this is so lovely and so good and intriguing, and the world building's really cool. It won't be for everyone, and I've said this about this trilogy before. Some people aren't going to like this. You have to let it take its time, and you kind of have to reread it. I think this is one of those books. It's also tiny font, which I'd completely forgotten about. Dragons, Paris, angels who have fallen to earth, who are being used up for magic, addiction, just some cool stuff. Yeah, this whole trilogy is great. I'm going to reread the third one as soon as I possibly can. I should be talking more about the plots of the books. I will try and do that from here on out. The next I don't want to talk about for too long. This is We Are the Dead by Mike Shackle. This was a Kindle purchase from Galax Fest, which also House of Binding Thorns was, so that's cool. I didn't like this very much. It was very man fantasy, but kind of in the worst way, where you're just sort of like, oh, why did this get published? There are so many books in the world. Why this book? You know? It's interesting. The one thing I did think was good was the idea of having a kind of rebel group and then them having like a rebel group offshoot that they have to go and deal with on occasion because they're like, please stop blowing things up. And they're like, we want to do the thing. And they're like, no, but not that. That was the one thing that I thought was interesting, but not particularly well executed. I didn't think the setting was particularly novel. I didn't think that the characters were great. The female characters all only did stuff because men asked them to or they felt obliged to. Regardless of whether that was their complete motivation, it was still a quite significant motivation, and yeah, I just wasn't sold, and I wanted to like it, and possibly The problem is there just wasn't enough of a hook. Like, the Bone Shard Daughter has really cool magic. That is a good hook. This just had this. And what am I meant to do with that? Next, I read Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson, but I'm also going to talk about the sequel, Firefight. This book's 1 and 2 in the Reckoners trilogy. So I have the third book, Calamity, on my July TBR, so I will have a full wrap-up of that at some point. It won't be a dedicated video, but I will talk about it. I thought these were good. I really liked Steelheart, and I was less sold on Firefight. Overall, I think what sold me was the world, and this superhero world, supervillain world, and the different powers are really interesting. That's the coolest thing about reading superhero books, is what powers do people have, learning how to take down these epics and kill them, which is the main plot of the book, because I'm going to talk about the plot. So we have this main character who's basically, his talent is he's a really good researcher. He's also great with guns, but he's a researcher essentially, and he's done all this research into the epics. He knows how to kill them, so he gets himself involved in with the Reckoners, who are trying to deal with these, and he basically says, you need to do more, we need to go after Steelheart, who's running new cargo, which he's completely turned to steel. And it's a really cool setting. I didn't like the main character. It was very much a kind of, it felt very teenage boy, and it like veered into, and I feel like I've talked about how much I dislike Robert Muchmore's characters a lot recently, but it veered into that territory on occasion, in that there's this other character, Megan, who's quite significant in the series. But just every 5 seconds he's like, oh, Megan's just so hot, and I get so tongue-tied when I talk to her, and, you know, I just want to talk about guns, and she's there being attractive, and I'm like, and it's just like, oh my goodness, shut up. And that got much worse in Firefight. It just bloomin' annoyed me. And Firefight also has some really, really cool world building. The way it tackles the city of New York is so interesting, but just the characters suck. And it's frustrating, and I think Brandon Sanderson does world building really well. He does creating magic systems really well, and superhero powers are essentially a magic system, and it's just interesting, but then you have this rubbish character ruining it all for you. So I am going to read Calamity, and I probably will enjoy Calamity because I want to know what the world building's like, and I know there's some other kind of individual books around as well, and I will read them because I really like this world, but boy, this main character's annoying. I've forgotten his name because he just so annoyed me. David. Which is such a boring man name as well. I'm sounding like I really hated these. I didn't. I really enjoyed them. I thought that the plot was good. Purely the characters annoyed me. Next, I reread Record of a Spaceborne Feud by Becky Chambers. This is the third book in the Wayfarers trilogy. I keep mixing it with Wayfinder. I think it's Wayfarer. I thought this was great. I loved this the first time I read it. I predicted I was going to cry, and I cried again. So if you don't know this series, it's basically Becky Chambers' kind of like slice of life fantasy. It's 3 very distinct books. In this book, it's primarily set on this ship that was the original ship that humanity used to leave Earth and find a new place to be, and find their place in the cosmos, as it were. And it's since defunct in the sense that they don't need to all live on it until they find somewhere. There's humanity everywhere now, but some people still live on the ship, and it's kind of like a communist sort of thing in that everyone has a job and you get paid universal stuff, and yeah. So we follow various characters, and it's kind of about home and place and human connection, and a lot of it actually ties into death in a way that I'd forgotten. One of the characters we follow is kind of a mortician, I suppose. I can't remember what the word they use for it is. I think she's a caretaker. I think that's what it's called. Anyway, it's essentially like a funerary person. And yeah, it gets into like death in space and the rituals that surround death and life, and I thought it was really, really beautiful, and I did cry. And yeah, the series is great. You should read them if you haven't already. They're just fabulous. And then I finished my reread of Eldest by Christopher Paolini, as I did on my TBR. I'm just showing you the face mask cover. Eldest by Christopher Paolini. As you can tell, this is my very loved copy from childhood. There are some weird, I think, hair dye stains in this as well. I'm a messy person, what can I say? I really like this on a reread. You can say a lot about the Inheritance saga, and a lot of people really don't like them for good reasons. They have a huge amount of nostalgia for me. They were kind of the big chunky fantasy that I was into when I was a teenager, and yeah, I really liked rereading this. It has some good stuff in it. The Ageti Blood Run is really cool. The one thing that is annoying, and again, maybe I'm just constantly getting annoyed at kind of teenage boys, but Eragon is such a teenage boy in this book, and his relationship with Arya is complicated, and I think when I was 17 I was like, oh my goodness, it's so beautiful, forbidden love, and now I'm like, oh my goodness, leave her alone. She has very clearly expressed that she does not want to date you. the fact that you keep mooning after her is inappropriate. And he gets better in the 4th book, if I'm remembering correctly, but at this point it's fully in just like, she is 100 and you are 17, please leave her alone. I don't think I need to get into the plot of the Inheritance Cycle, do I? Farm boy fantasy dragons. Allergies, not too bad yet. We're doing okay, or maybe Puriton, not sponsored, although Puriton, if you want a spokesperson, I will be that for you. Next, I'm going to talk about my audiobook reads for the month. We are by no means done, but this is what I finished next. I finished The Mad Ship by Robin Hobb, and I also finished this month's Ship of Destiny. I finished this about a week ago. I obviously had the audiobook, although I do own the physical copy of book 3. I thought these were fabulous. I thought they were really good. I talked about it in my vlog, but there's a massive content warning for rape in the 3rd one. It happens on page. If you're listening to the audiobooks, you cannot avoid it. It's very, very intense. So if you are very sensitive to that, maybe don't go there. But Robin Hobb is kind of known for this very realistic treatment of bad stuff that can happen to women, especially in a kind of historical-esque setting. Yeah, I thought this was really, really nice and a really good series overall. The first one I found terribly difficult, and I talked about that in my May wrap-up. And these two were much easier. Better things happened. I think the balance between good and bad was much more even, and bad things happening to bad people happened more. I saw someone commenting about one of the villains, saying that they were one of the best written characters ever because they had all of this bad stuff and redemption and all this stuff. I don't agree. That person is terrible. They do not deserve redemption. We're just gonna leave them being terrible. To those wondering, these did not suffer from me having read Dragon Keeper first. It was fine. If you really care about spoilers, it would matter. If you really care about a specific reading experience, I think it would matter. I personally find that reading things out of order just gives you a different reading experience. But yeah, if you like dragons, boats, epic world building, a lot of bad things happening to characters that you like, I think these are great to go for. That sounded dismissive. I do really think these are worth reading if you like epic fantasy and you want to read more older epic fantasy, but you're kind of scared because women are treated really badly in it. This acknowledges that as a thing that happens, but there are also some really cool female characters within it, and there's a lot of overcoming stuff, and I think that's really good. Right, let's keep going. Next, I finished my other Kindle read. It was Selling Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. I thought this was alright. People go mad for these books, and I assume that must be because they get better, because this was good, but by no means as groundbreaking as the internet was making it feel like it was going to be. It's the Tower of Babel as a concept of kind of like this place with ringdoms, so kingdoms but they go up, and this place where you get lost and Senlin has to find his wife, and it's all very sad, but I think partly because my experience was coloured by having heard Justine's review where she said that the women are so replaceable. Not irreplaceable. But I think when you know that reading it, you notice it. It's not really something you can avoid, and it's very, very true. And I talked about it in my vlog, and I thought it was going to be this thing of all the characters are replaceable, but then characters come back, and you're like, oh well, so it's just the women then. Great. I think I just wanted more out of this book, and I wanted more descriptions of the ringdoms and more interest, and instead it was mostly just about Senlin being like, oh, I lost my wife, and you're like, yeah, you did, but you don't seem to be owning that fact. You just seem to be mooning over who she is and being a pain. And honestly, if the whole book was from his wife's perspective, Maria, I think her name is, and I've forgotten because it didn't matter, if the whole book was from her perspective, it's just her having a ripping adventure through the ringdoms, yes. Senlin being a whinger? No. Next, I reread, I should say, Storm Chaser by Paul Stewart and Chris Riddell. This is the second book in the Edge Chronicles, the Twig trilogy. It is also the second Edge Chronicles book I ever read. This was a lovely nostalgic reread. It's great. I hadn't read this one in quite some time, and I talked about it in my blog, but I really think it is worth reading this immediately after reading Winter Nights, because the parallels are interesting and the callbacks are good, and yes, it's good. I've forgotten how dark this is. It gets very, very dark at points, and I know that Edge Chronicles do, and they're not patronising, but yeah, I'd just completely forgotten. This is Sky Pirates, there's Banda Bears, who are like my favourite things ever. It's just good stuff. It was very sad, it was very quick, the illustrations are stunning, as they always are. At some point I will sit down and just find the time to both obtain and read all of the Edge Chronicles up to where I'd got to, which I think was the Immortals. I think that was kind of like as far as I got. I know they've done others since, but I've not read them. But yeah, I just want to relive those times. After that, I read Warrior of the World by Trisha Levenseller. This is by the author of Daughter of the Pirate King. I thought this was good. My overall impression of this was like, yes, I liked a lot of this. it's very short, and well, maybe it's better to show you that way. It's very short, and I think it could have done more with like another kind of 100 pages or so. I think it could have gone much deeper and been really interesting. So this is, I've forgotten her name, Rasmira is the heir to this kingdom, and she ends up doing a challenge, and things happen, and she ends up basically being kicked out into the wild to kill a god is her task. And she, within that, kind of learns a lot about her society that's like less than amazing, and falls in love, because obviously it's a romance. If you've read Daughter of the Pirate King, you'll be expecting that, I think. There's a lot of action in it as well, which I appreciated. There's a lot of kind of fighting, which is nice to balance out the kind of sappy side of it. It was good, it just didn't go into the stuff I wanted it to get into, and the ending is very rushed because it can't spend much time on it. Yeah, it was alright. To be honest, yeah, it's alright was how I was feeling when I finished Daughter of the Pirate King for a second time. So maybe that's just kind of where I'm at with YA at the moment. Next, I did in fact swap out my reread of Secret of the Sirens for The Gorgon's Gaze, because I'd read Secret of the Sirens twice, and The Gorgon's Gaze was on Kindle sale right at the start of the month, so I bought that and I had a great time. This is the second book in the Companions series, I want to say? Yeah, Companion series. This second book is a lot, even more environmental than the first one, but it's done in a way that feels very genuine, and it feels informative, and it's kind of inspiring and uplifting of young people, but also very realistic of like what you can do as a young person, which sounds odd because you'd think it would be unrealistic to say, well, like, you can ride in on a Pegasus and stop an oil company, but actually there are as many non-powerful or non-mythical creature bound humans in this as there are mythical, and it's a really nice kind of, you can insert yourself anywhere in the story and you'd still have a cool story, which I liked. There's some really sad moments, like she gets completely cut off from all of her family at one point, and it's really sad. By the way, if you haven't encountered these books, I should say, it's essentially, in the world, mythical creatures are real, and the main character, Connie, is all the magical powers for this society, for the Society for the Protection of Mythical Creatures or something like that, and so all the books about that, but they're kind of also about the environment. Basically, they're really nice middle grade, and you should read them because I really like them. Yeah, there's also a dragon in this one, a baby dragon. Oh, it's lovely. Let's move on before I just wax lyrical about baby dragons for ages. Oh, that's a bit of a tonal shift. Next, I reread, I should say, God's Grave by J. Kristoff. I had a good time with this. This is the one that has gladiator fighting, and I think it's probably the most structured of the three. So the first one has her at assassin school, but this one has gladiator school, effectively, and it has a clear progression of bouts, and my favourite thing is books with very clear progression. I don't know what it is, I like structure. Clearly in life that is not the case, but in books it is. I had a good time rereading this, is basically what I'll say. I think that there's some cool power stuff in here. This is the book where it gets gayer, which is always nice. And yeah, battery changed. I don't know if that cut me off in the middle. If it did, I was just talking about stuff. Then I finished my read of Animorphs 8, which you can watch the review of. It went up, when I'm filming this, it went up yesterday. I like the Animorphs books. Animorphs 8 is probably one of the more fun ones we've had so far, and then it gets suddenly very dark and difficult, and yeah, just go watch that video because I have fun making them. Animorphs 8, I read that. After that I read Wayward Witch by Zoraida Cordova. I talked about this a lot on the vlog, so I won't dwell on it too much. This is the third book in the Brooklyn Brujas series. The first two I read, Labyrinth Lost and Bruja Born, and I liked them well enough. I didn't hang on to my physical copies of them. They weren't books I wanted to reread. This book was the book that was clearly written with me in mind. I don't know what it was. I connected so much more to Rose, the main character, and her journey. There's also like a magical quest. There's kind of like a magical power squad going on. It's what I enjoy, and I don't know what wasn't in the first two books that is in this one that I really connected to, but I genuinely think I just got on with Rose as a character more. At one point she's like at a party and she just decides to be reading her book in the kitchen, and I think that's probably where that connection is. Anyway, yeah, it's really, really lovely, and of the three it's my favourite. I think I'd be interested to kind of poll people and see if it is that there's a book for everyone, or if this is a writing development kind of thing. Yeah, Magical Quest, which is kind of fae-y, not really, but a little bit. Actually no, it's pretty fae-y. I just don't want to make that comparison because that feels very Western. No, I liked it a lot, basically is what I'm saying. I think it was well worth reading, and if you are on the fence about reading this series, maybe start with the third one. It will spoil a lot for you, but I liked it the most. After that, I read Jingo by Terry Pratchett, and I didn't like this too much. I like Sam Vimes as a character hugely. This is another Discworld novel, and in this case, it's Ankh-Morpork, which is the city that we all know and love from most of the books, is at war with Clatch, which is kind of it's kind of India is what it is, and that's what makes it super uncomfortable. And this was published in 97, and some of the things that are said in this book weren't right in 1997 and feel even worse now. And it's difficult because a lot of the time the book is calling out racism, as in like, isn't this funny that someone would think this? Which is fine until you're at the point where you're like, but people do think that. So is it funny to be like having your characters who in other books are just like well-loved characters say those things? I don't know. I'm probably going to unhaul this at some point because just not my favourite, and the more I read of older Terry Pratchett, the less I like it. There we go. After that, I did in fact swap out my reread of Gemina for Obsidio by J. Christopher and Amy Kaufman. I loved reading this again. I think that the Illuminae files are just fun to read because they just shake things up. If you don't know, these books are told partly in prose and partly in like instant messaging, and sometimes in even weirder stuff. And this one I think takes the what are all the different ways we can tell a story and still have it printed on paper done, and it's really cleverly done. It's still way too straight. This whole series is way too straight. I think Katie pointed out, she was like, how would you describe this series? Straight couple, straight couple, straight couple. Ooh, the weird AI having an identity crisis. That's what I want to read. And that's how it is. This third one is good. It's nice. It's fun. I think Illuminae is still the strongest of all three. Gemini is really clever and fun to read, difficult to read. I'd be really interested to see how they do the audiobook for that. It's nice to round off a series, and I enjoyed this reread. Next, I had my reread of Wonder Woman Warbringer by Leigh Bardugo. It's interesting. The more Leigh Bardugo I reread, the less I like them. So I reread King of Scars, and I was kind of like, and I reread this, and I was kind of like, and it's what makes me slightly nervous to reread Six of Crows, because I loved Six of Crows the first time I read it, and I think I have reread it. Maybe. But what if I don't like it again? What if it's gone the way of all the other Leigh Bardugo for me? I don't know. This is from when they did a DC Icon series, and I keep mentioning the Marie Lou Batman because it was terrible, but I just feel the need to remind you that it was terrible. This is less terrible. I said it in the vlog, it doesn't go anywhere near deep enough to the places it needs to go. It's not long, and I get that it needs to be an action thing, but it's not a superhero origin story, really. And it's not a story that kind of talks about race in a particularly nuanced way, because it's a white author doing it, basically. And it's just, it falls flat in a lot of places that I don't think it should. And there's still some really good stuff in there, and it's got some nice fish out of water moments for Diana of just like, why does this matter? But yeah, I like the Wonder Woman film more than I like this book, and it's not a book of the film, but I like the film a lot more, and I didn't like the film that much, so awkward. From that to a female hero book, Bloody Rose by Nicholas Eames. This is the sequel/companion novel to Kings of the Wild. I got myself in a real muddle with this when I was trying to explain what it is, so let me try again. In this, the main character Tam is joining the band, aka group of mercenaries, of the daughter of the main character from the first book. So Bloody Rose is his daughter, but we get Tam's perspective on events. Tam is amazing. Tam is a queer character. She's a woman who loves women, and that's just said at the beginning, and then just goes on, and she's like, yeah, I'm going to sleep with some women, it's going to be great. And you're like, yes, thank you, this is amazing. I need the TV series of this book just immediately. My favourite character is a Bloody Rose, who is great, and also deeply flawed, and I liked her a lot. And also Cura, I think her name is. 33 books, guys, it's hard to keep the names in my head. Yeah, Cura, who is an ink witch, so she has like tattoos on her body that she can summon forth and they fight for her, and it's just really, really good stuff. I think there were elements of this book that I was kind of like, if what you want to give me is silly action, can you lean more into that, because this is getting about parenthood and I'm a bit tired. But overall, I really like this. I read some reviews of this where people are saying they didn't connect to the characters in the same way as they did with book one. I can't remember how much I felt connected to the characters in book one. It's been probably 2 years since I read it. But I felt perfectly connected to these. I really like them, so maybe it's a matter of personal preference. Maybe you're a Bloody Rose or a Kings of the Wild. Yeah, somebody described this as George R. R. Martin meets Terry Pratchett, and it does have a lot of the humour of Pratchett and the kind of irreverence. It's not as kind of like, oh, I'm writing very worthy fantasy. It's just like, yeah, they want to fight monsters. It's going to be good fun. I'm using a lot of rock band references. It's nice. I really enjoyed this and I would really recommend it. It's probably one of my most recommendable books. Next I had my reread of Beyond a Darkened Shore by Jessica Leake. This is a reread because I couldn't remember what happened, and it turns out what happened wasn't particularly memorable. This is a fairly generic YA. I have dark powers, nobody likes me, oh a boy, he likes me, let's go do a quest together, but then add in kind of like Norse gods versus Catholicism and Celts versus Northmen, and that's it. It's like they kind of put a Norse filter over a YA plot. It's fine written. If you don't read a lot of YA, you might have a good time with this. If you read a lot of YA, it's kind of like, well, this isn't doing anything new for me, which is where I'm at with YA at the moment. It has to be doing something different. So yeah, probably again will be unhauling this in the future, but I'm glad I reread it to know that for certain. And I didn't have a bad time reading it, it just isn't what I need at the moment. So speaking of YA that's doing something different, this is The Tiger at Midnight by Swati Tidala. This I really loved. This is a cat and mouse story between a assassin and a soldier, and in amongst all of the stuff they kind of tear apart their whole worldview and put it back together again. It's also a romance, and I just really liked this. And in comparison to, what did I read? This Rebel Waves, the sequel, Our Darkened Shore, something like that, where it was person gets captured, person escapes, person gets captured, person escapes. That is the structure of this book, but it feels so much more intentional and it just works, and I can't 100% explain it. I'll be interested to read the sequel. I will read the sequel at some point, but I'll be interested to see if it stands up because it doesn't have that thread going through it, like they've done something else with the plot. But yeah, absolutely stunning. I really thought this was worth a read. It's good fun. After that I read The Four Profound Weaves. This is a little novella in what's called the Birdverse, which I assume means there are more books coming, and I'm very excited to read them. How often do you get a book with older transgender people as the main characters? Like never. It was so good, and it's a unique magic system. There are these two transgender elders who have to learn the weave of death, so of these four profound weaves, the weave of death, to free the spirits of these people that have been trapped by the evil tyrant who's running everything. And you kind of need to experience this for yourself. I'm not explaining it particularly well, but it's a really lovely, simultaneously very small and epic story, just contained in this little novella, and it's really nice, and I thought it was really good, and I'm glad I read it, because I started reading it a few months ago, and I couldn't get into it, and I didn't like it, and I put it away. And then I picked it up again and I was like, okay, right, we're going to just let this story happen, let this story take me. I'm not going to care too much about the world building, because I'll pick up what I need to know, like I did with This Is How You Lose the Time War. I actually had a really good time, and it was really lovely and emotional and sweet. And good. Then I read Feathertide by Beth Cartwright. This was another review copy. I think this might have got the wrong way around. I think I read Feathertide first, but I didn't enjoy Feathertide particularly. Feathertide follows a young girl who's born covered in feathers, so she's kept a secret. She lives in the basement of a brothel, essentially, all her life, until one day she's like, I'm going to go and find my father. And so she travels to this mystical city, and she waits to find her father. And I should have liked this. I really should have done, but I didn't like the character, and the writing felt very self-aware. It didn't have the kind of fluidity that other... Let me try and explain. I'm not opposed to waffly writing. I can cope with some flowery prose. I'm okay with it. In this case, it felt like it was going like, oh, aren't I being beautiful? And I don't care about this. I don't care about your plot. I don't understand what's happening. Why does this keep coming back round again? And in some ways there are some lovely moments to the story. Like the journey of self-expression is lovely, and self-love is nice, and there's also a queer plot which is fine. It's not particularly groundbreaking. What I will say is I liked the ending. I think that's probably the only bit where I went, yeah, that was worth reading for. Just the final kind of epilogue moment was nice, but otherwise I would say don't bother with this one. It's not going to rock the world. I think these last three got in a bit of a muddle. I was reading fairly quickly towards the end of the month. I think that I finished A Conjuring of Light by V.E. Schwab, and I read the first half of this before the month even started, and the second half right at the end of the month. What are you going to do? I don't want to talk too much about this because I think you just know the series if you know it, and if you don't know it, then it's a cool magic system, bit of an epic story, but with a very small cast of characters. You'll get it. I think this is a good conclusion to a trilogy. I see the flaws in V.E. Schwab's writing more than I used to, but I think that this is a really good book, and I liked it a lot. And I don't really know what else to say, because how can you get into the third book in a trilogy without going off on a tangent about a whole trilogy? I've only got so many memory cards. Then I read House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig, and I loved this. This was basically everything I wanted it to be. Talk about YA that does something different, and I don't read a lot of horror, so maybe it's on me and what I read a lot of, but this is a 12 Dancing Princesses retelling, crossed with a haunted house story, crossed with a weird god magical realm. It's really good. I really, really like this. Atmospherically, this was just fabulous, and that's one of the things I've realised is pretty much most important to me, is atmosphere. I like the main character, I like the setting, it's set by the sea. Is anyone surprised that I like the setting? No. And I just thought this was great, and I would really recommend it. And if you know me, I will lend it to you, because I appreciate not everyone's going to want to buy a hardback. The last book that was actually on my July TBR was The Expanded Companion Guide to the World of Lunaria by L.L. McNeill, and this is just a little book that includes a bit of description and a bit of commissioned artwork for pretty much everything in her series so far. This is actually part 1. I haven't twigged that, but I guess she can't spoil everything for the second half. What I liked about this was it just summed stuff up, and I think partly because that's one of the problems I had with Marauder, and maybe Palom as well, was I didn't feel like I had a good sense of what was going on, and it felt like there was a lot that wasn't being told to me, and this kind of added that in, and I wish more series would do this. I don't want a hefty, big, special edition illustrated companion guide, like just a little, you know, quick, some art, some description, what you need to know stuff would be great, and I thought this was really nice. And it actually did get me pretty hyped up for the next books in the series, so that's cool. If you want some indie, self-published fantasy, World of Lunaria. The last 2 books I read this month were, in theory, mood reads, but I'm really bad at mood reading because I just need somebody else to make decisions for me about what to read, and everything on my TBR was on my July, and I'm a mess, basically. So I ended up pulling from my reread jar, and I reread Bright We Burn by Kirsten White. This is the 3rd book in the Conqueror's Saga, which, if you don't know it, it's Genderflip Vlad the Impaler. This is actually Radu's series. Her younger brother is a side character in the first book, but it's a beautiful take on his story, and this book is much more about him than I remembered it being, and it was really lovely. I don't love the ending of this, and I didn't when I first read it, and I really don't now. I think that it makes sense, and in some ways it was written into a corner of how else do you handle this, but yeah, I didn't love the ending, but I like the book overall. I think it's really good. I could talk about the Conqueror's Saga all day, so I won't. And then just today I finished State of Sorrow by Melinda Salisbury. This is now my 3rd time rereading this, and I love it every single time I read it. Of course I want a YA book where she has to get elected. It's an election book, and I think that's so clever. And it's also kind of a mystery, not quite a murder mystery, but a mystery as well. And it's just really good. And I remember I didn't love Song of Sorrow as much. It's kind of a book that's really intelligent, and I really appreciate that about it. But it doesn't then say, but if you want the intelligent side, you can't have the beautiful descriptions of food and ball gowns. It has that as well, and that's great. And if you want a book that will make you hungry, this is also that book. Our main character, Sorrow, grows up in as the Chancellor's daughter in a world where everything's basically been in mourning her entire life for her older brother, and her mother, who died very similar times. And in this book, she has to run for office, essentially. And at the same time, you see this kind of world come to life again post that mourning period, and it's really, really nice, and a really unique setting, and YA doing something different. And I think one of the things this did for me is really make me go, actually, I really didn't enjoy Hold Back the Tide as much as I could have done. If this is what Melinda Salisbury can write, Hold Back the Tide was not as strong. It felt like a step backwards. Yeah, that's everything I read in the month of June. I have a smaller TBR for July, but who knows how the reading will go. And my tea has not quite gone cold. It's still a drinkable temperature. My allergies are beginning to kick off, so we should draw this to a close. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have stuck around all the way to the end, thank you. I appreciate this was a long one. I read a lot of books. One day I will learn to talk about the plot of those books. One day. I do talk more about them in my vlogs, so please do subscribe and watch those if you want a bit more of an in-depth look at what I'm reading. I think they are good, and they're when I do my best talking. Comment below if you've read any of these, if you thought any of them were good, if you had any opinions that were drastically different from mine or the same, let me know. You can also subscribe, it makes me feel loved and appreciated, and I will see you in the next one.